Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for tuning in to SBAM's Small Business Briefing. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. And we'd like to welcome one of our new members every Monday. And today we're welcoming one of our new VIP members, Ann Kraft Consulting in East Lansing, Michigan. So thanks, Ann Kraft, for becoming a member. Brian is otherwise engaged today. And so we have Kelly Saunders with us. Kelly, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a frequent flyer here these days, but always happy to be with you. Kelly Saunders, Vice President of Policy and Engagement here at SBM. Glad to bring you some news from over the weekend and talk about things that are relevant to all of you small business owners here across Michigan.
All right, yes, thanks, Kelly. Thanks for pitching in for Brian today. Let's start off today's show with news from the Redistricting Commission. We have covered the Redistricting Commission in great detail here on the briefing. We covered the need to redraw maps due to racial gerrymandering. The new House maps have been settled, but there is this question, what about the Senate maps?
Yes, so as you said, Sarah, we have talked about this in depth, but it does make a difference to many of our members, specifically in the Detroit area, as you said, had some issues with racial gerrymandering. The House was on an accelerated timeline because they are up for elect or re-election this year or election if they're running for the first time. And so those maps, they had to bring in a special master. The redistricting commission had to come in and redraw those. And so that has finally been settled. And those districts will obviously be up for election this year. But the question was, how quickly would they redraw the Senate maps? And would the Senate elections stand as they were for this past election cycle? Or would that be called into question? Or, are we going to just talk about the next Senate election? And so the three-judge panel did decide that they would wait on the Senate maps and have them redrawn for the next election. The Senate is not up this year. Senate is four-year terms. And so this would be talking about 2026. And so the Redistricting Commission met last week to talk about the timeline for the Senate maps. And essentially, the timeline was set. So the commission will essentially have hearings in June, like they did for the House, on the Detroit Senate configuration before making changes and adopting a final map for court review no later than June 27th. And so that had to be decided on by the commission, but also agreed upon with the parties, essentially on both sides. So the commission was ordered to obviously remap Detroit's Senate district after its adopted 2021 Linden Senate maps were struck down. And the commissioners did complete a draft of a new remedial House plan, obviously, that we talked about. And so the timeline and like the process will be the same, except for the Senate can be a little bit, can be dragged out a little bit. So basically, the timeline to draw and adopt a new Detroit area Senate map has those fewer time constraints because of the 2026 election. The court did not order special elections, as I just said, on whatever map the court might help decide and draft. So the schedule adopted on Thursday by the commission would have the commission start drawing a new Detroit area Senate map on April 23rd and continue until May 2nd. Commissioners will then begin holding the in-person drawing sessions from May 7th through the 9th, and will go back to map drawing in virtual sessions May 14 through May 21. And so a draft map to the court is due on May 22nd. Several public hearings, as I just said, will be scheduled to follow with two virtual hearings on May 29 and June 6. And public meetings in Detroit will be held June 11th through the 13th. The public comment period for those will be June 21 for the adopted schedule, and mapping deliberations post-public comment would begin on June 24th through June 26th, with the final map being to the court by June 27th. Now, that's just the commission's work. As you recall, there was a special master that essentially does work on the side to draw their own maps if the commission does not draw correct maps. That is still in place. So essentially, there is a time period where the court can come back and there can be rebuttals back and forth on if their map is correct versus the special master's map, which will be correct at the end of the day because these are professionals that come in from outside Michigan that do this as their full-time jobs. So it was very obviously heated, and sometimes there was a commissioner on the commission that does call into question a lot of things. I actually kind of like her. She's a little spicy. She's an an independent that sits on the commission. And so she did call into question many things about, can we move this process along? It seems like if we just sat down and got the job done, this could be on an accelerated timeline. Many of the commissioners that serve on this commission, they have full-time jobs. This isn't their full-time job. Now, if you do recall back a few months ago, the commission did vote to increase their salary from $39,000 a year to $55,000 a year because it was taking longer for them to essentially do their jobs that they didn't do right the first time. And so this commission's really just been under fire and a lot of controversy, and they continue to be because they just can't seem to quite get it right. So we'll continue to bring you the news on this, but back to the literal drawing board they go for the respective Senate maps.
All right, and another news item regarding the redistricting commission is the approval of a fairly sizable contract for media outreach. Tell us more about that.
Yes. So, in an effort to obviously gain that feedback that we just talked about from constituents in Detroit, they were seeking contracts from different media firms to do traditional media and then non-traditional media. Traditional media is like, just flat out straight, to in newspapers, to TV, radio, all that good stuff. The non-traditional is more like the social media stuff. And so they did decide on a $49,000 contract to be split between two media firms for those different avenues. The non-traditional media won't just include social media. It'll also be roundtables with millennials and then a couple other components to reach directly into communities in Detroit. Just as a reminder, the Senate districts that are affected are 1, 3, 6, 8, 10, and 11, and that does span across Oakland, Wayne, and Macomb, not just centered around Detroit. And so it's interesting that they have to obviously hire these media firms to do that outreach so that they can truly get that public comment period. It's technically the right thing to do because they do need to hear from the constituents of these respective Senate districts. But the curious thing about the contract is it's $49,000 split between the two. However, that doesn't include the actual media buying that they will be doing to do the outreach. So 49 grand to the media firms as a contract, what it costs to actually reach people with the media buys, we don't know. And so this is a very expensive project at the expense of us as taxpayers in this process. And so it's going to be interesting to see at the end of the day what the cost of this exercise is going to be. We know those special masters are not cheap either. And so I continue to say very skeptically, as someone who worked in the Department of State in elections for a long time, this doesn't seem to be a process that has worked to the benefit of specifically the Detroit region. And we really hope that in the future they can work out these kinks and get it right because it's just it's not fair and it's not right to the constituents that live in that district, nor to the taxpayers that are funding this process. So hopefully they can get it right, but not a smooth ride whatsoever during this time.
All right, and like you said, this will not be the last that we report out on redistricting. Okay, Kelly, there was a report last week about the gas tax, and Governor Whitmer said there may be options to consider in the future, but what might those options be? What did she say?
Yeah, so if you recall, obviously when the governor's very famous campaign slogan of "Fix the bleeping roads." I don't swear on here. This is a family-friendly show, but going from a 30-cent gas tax to a 45-cent gas tax, that was met with a ton of resistance, not only from the legislature, but also constituents in general. That is quite a jump. And, you know, there is something to be said, right? Like everybody agrees that we need to pay for roads, but how we pay for roads and us paying for roads, nobody wants to do it. It's a really hard, like, jump to take. And so, it's the governor has acknowledged that was not a very popular stance to increase the gas tax that much. But also, if we look across the landscape and see how the Biden administration and the Whitmer administration has tried to steer people away from gas consuming cars and more towards the hybrids and the electrification, that's actually not really on message for them anyway anymore. And so she did acknowledge last week that using a vehicle miles traveled concept or toll roads are possible replacements for the idea of an antiquated gas tax, and that people are looking into what options may be. The Federal Highway Administrator was here with her last week for a project in Kalamazoo, and they were pretty much in agreement that they are having pretty in-depth conversations surrounding, these specific two ideas. So, in an era of fuel-efficient vehicles and electric vehicles, putting a surcharge on gasoline purchases to fund road repairs is gradually just less effective. The revenue is not coming in. And so her direct quote was, I think before too long, we're going to have something on the table, which is interesting because we've talked about this too in the legislature, and just amongst the public, right? It's going to be a very tight year with an election. The House will essentially probably regain their majority in full effect this week with elections. And so, but still 56, 54, very tight. And she did say that toll roads would be a part of the solution, but it's not the total solution. She also said miles traveled, like I said, that means for however many miles that you may travel on a road, you would be charged. As someone who travels for work, I'm thinking about our boss alone who travels all over the state to see all of our small business owners too. Um, people who choose to live in one place and work in another, I'll just use myself as an example, and maybe this hits too close to home, which is why I'm in my feelings about it. I choose to live in West Michigan because this is where my family and my friends are. But my whole career has been a service to Lansing and being a part of the process because I love the process and I want to do right by Michigan. I travel 140 miles every day. And so are we punishing people for using the roads? I don't know. Again, I know that there needs to be a solution, but when people are starting to have these kinds of conversations, I think no matter what, we're going to struggle, right? It's hard to realize that you need to pay for the problem, but when you're the consumer and you want that road to be there, you also can't get over the cost and being punished essentially for doing your job at times. And I think about our members too and how they have fleets of vehicles that have to deliver things too. So that's another expense to, take on. And so as we hear how the governor wants to approach this and whether this is a legislative fix or some other way, I think there's going to be, a need to speak into the system and say what's really possible and what can people afford, not only in their work life, but in their personal life too. So stay tuned on that.
Absolutely. Something we'll be covering closely as new details unfold. All right, Kelly, there was a new resource released from the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs called the Michigan Business Roadmap. What is this? Why should our members pay attention and care?
Yeah, so we've talked about how we share healthy relationships with many departments within state government. The Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs and the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity are two of those departments. And we caught wind of them announcing a new website, which I believe, Sarah, that you're going to drop in the comments, called the Michigan Business Roadmap. Didn't see it coming. Pretty pleased that they're trying to collaborate their two departments together. Their whole point was to ensure that businesses are successful in compliance with state laws and regulations and protected against business scams and identity theft. And so the Michigan Business Roadmap is essentially a new website in collaboration with those two departments. And it will serve or seek to serve as a straightforward resource for entrepreneurs and small business owners to navigate many of the processes that may seem very overwhelming or inundating when they're starting their business. And so I mean, honestly, kind of cool to see that they unrolled this step-by-step program. They want to ensure business owners can find, interpret, and access all the resources through the roadmap for clear entry points to different requirements. They will help businesses enhance workplace safety, avoid violating critical laws and regulations for hours worked, paying employees ensure that injured worker protections are in place. And so the roadmap will inform business owners of the various agencies within the two departments because they do overlap often. And that may need to obviously interact, register, and file something on behalf of their businesses. And so the 12 steps are pretty nice. I would be curious if you get in this and you want to navigate it and give us some feedback. We'd like to share that with the respective departments as you use it. On its face, it seems pretty user friendly. So the 12 steps are basically how to file with the corporation division. Ironic, number 2 on their list, beneficial ownership in FinCEN, which obviously we currently have a case pending against this. And so, but it is the number 2 thing on their list. Submit your annual report, how to obtain a federal ID number, apply for tax exempt status, open a business bank account, how to register with the Department of Treasury, registering for UIA, insurance filing, reporting unclaimed property, obtaining required licensing and permits, and how to access labor and workforce resources. Additionally, they have a couple different categories on how to access protecting yourself against cybersecurity threats, which obviously we help here too at SBAM with. But it seems like it's a pretty comprehensive website. Encouraged to see state government moving in that way to try to make things easier for specifically our small business owners, but those seeking to come to Michigan and having the resources at their fingertips. I played around with it a little bit myself. It looks like they, do have a chat function where people will respond to you and a couple different direct numbers into the different divisions to help. So if you are looking to start up a new business and are accessing those resources, give us some feedback on what you think of it. And again, encouraged to see this type of collaboration happening amongst the departments.
Oh, absolutely. We field a lot of those questions here at SBAM and, in particular our membership team, and having them all in one spot is pretty nice. So, but to Kelly's point, if you have any feedback, let us know. You can email sbam@sbam.org and we will pass it along. All right, so the Detroit News had an interesting story regarding the big 3 automakers using more AI. There is a tight labor market. We've talked about that. We're hearing that from our members. And so the idea of using AI to fill some of those gaps is becoming a little bit more appealing. So Kelly, what are the big 3 doing and how might it translate to our members?
Yeah, really interesting story. And we've talked about AI and where we're going within our own organization, but providing tools to our own members on, where you want to go. And also we know some of our members are thinking about AI themselves in a tight labor market and how can they retool to use that if they can't find the talent they need to fill their respective, roles within their organization. So this was focused on the big 3, which we know obviously impacts our economy here in Michigan, but referencing that, automation within the big 3 was really used for some very dangerous or maybe, dull, dirty jobs that took people away from that in order for protection purposes, but could just kind of, be alleviated of that duty within the big 3. The twist on this was seeing the automakers turn to AI really as the strike as a catalyst to fill the need of keeping production up, when they were in the fight, obviously with the strike, in order to not lose that productivity. And so it was just a really interesting way to see how they are pivoting to fill the void if they have issues with strikes in the future, how to continue to keep their, productivity up. And also there was a recognition from one of the big three that while people are not, because obviously in the contract negotiations, if they're going to move towards automation smartly for the workers, there has to be some sort of notification that they're going to move towards moving certain products in an automation way, or a certain, line in an automation way, that they have a grievance process, right? That they don't feel that their workers are getting the opportunity to work in that specific function. But the automakers are saying, well, we're moving towards this because it's through attrition. We may not be hiring as many people, or we can't find the talent that we were needing. So this is filling the void. And so it's just kind of interesting to see that the automakers are feeling this just like, we might be on ground zero in that talent, but also exploring, right, with AI and what it can do to take that piece of maybe being unsafe on the line and using automation to be quicker, to be productive, to be safer, for workers to monitor that process. Obviously, we're not just having, robots go wild and building things. You have to monitor that stuff. But the downside of it, in recognition by the big three, is when something breaks in AI, or you can't be as flexible, right? Right now, if somebody's sick or if something isn't going the way that, it needs to on a manual, you can have somebody step in, right? It's just like that in a small business. Somebody's down, you step in and you pick it up and you keep going. Oftentimes with, automation, what we're finding is it's a very large, component to fix. And so you have to bring a specialist in to fix things. And so there's this balance, if you will, of, automation, talent shortage, keeping people safe, people needing to skill up because they might not be where they need to be for respective jobs. And so as we move towards this idea of automation, what kind of role does it play, and how does that trickle down? And do we lose that, camaraderie within cultures? Do we, in business type settings, do we lose the customer service aspect of moving towards automation in a restaurant? These are all conversations that are being had. And so just an interesting story to see how the big three are pivoting as well, in the world that they're living in, with this, I'll say, head to head with maybe consumers not necessarily consuming the EV market like they thought they would, and still keeping their people productive and on the line. So anyway, just something to consider and keep on your radar, and we'll continue to follow that story too as we move towards this new time in life of what people want to hold on to in electrification. So.
All right, well, thanks for that report. Our friends at the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce recently released a poll that highlights what voters care about, which is obviously going to be pretty important information this election year. What are the results?
Yeah, so the Grand Rapids Chamber actually has their big policy conference in West Michigan this week, and they always conduct a poll to try to take the pulse of what constituents are feeling within their community. And we've talked about West Michigan in depth on this briefing, how it's a thriving, a growing community for Michigan. People are moving to West Michigan, Northern Michigan, and so it's a changing community. And so what are people saying? The poll conducted showed that 56% of voters feel Grand Rapids and Kent County are on the right track. 30% believe the area is on the wrong track, and 12% were unsure. But the poll finds that 71% of respondents cite both public safety and the cost of living as the most important issue as the election comes up. And this is followed by education at 66%, addressing homelessness at 49%, and more jobs and better careers at 44%. Of the makeup of those that took the poll, 29% identified as Republicans, 27% as Democrats, and 27% as independents. And so a pretty good breadth across, and pretty characteristic of what West Michigan has become over the last few years in the election, but also very telling, right? These are what constituents and voters are saying. Number one and number two, public safety and the cost of living. And so that's pretty on track with what we've talked about here and what we hear through our survey. Sarah, not necessarily the public safety aspect, but cost of living, inflation, what to pay workers, what our business owners are taking home themselves. And so I want to thank our friends at the Grand Rapids Chamber for putting their data out. It's a value add for what we do here in at SBM and for those of our small business owners in the West Michigan area. Not so specific to West Michigan, but on the other side of the state, it's a good time to remind our folks in Westland and Warren that you have a special election tomorrow. We have obviously endorsed in both of those races in the state house. And so take a look at those endorsements and don't forget to get out and vote, not only tomorrow, but in your upcoming elections in August and November this year.
All right, well, speaking of those upcoming elections, Kelly, the presidential race is obviously heating up. Michigan is a battleground state. We know Donald Trump and Joe Biden are the Republican and Democratic nominees, but Robert F. Kennedy is still kind of hanging around there. Is he going to be an option on Michigan's ballot?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? You know, we've heard of third party candidates over the years. The most notable, I think, Ross Perot from years ago, who kind of took some thunder out of some people's sails. And people are wondering if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will do the same thing for former President Trump or current President Biden. And so the big thing is that if you're not nominated by a specific party, you have to get signatures to be on the ballot in Michigan, and about 12,000 to be exact. And it has to be 100 signatures from the you have to get 100 signatures in 7 of the 13 districts, and then you can collect however many you want from every respective district from there. And so there was this, idea, will Robert F. Kennedy Jr. be the libertarian candidate? And he kind of put that to bed over the weekend that he is not seeking that they feel very confident in their ability to get the signatures to make the ballot in all of the states, Michigan included, and that there was an indication from him over the weekend that they have begun their work in Michigan to get those signatures to be on the ballot. And so don't be surprised if you're obviously going to your local supermarket or respectively wherever you are, and you might have people ask you to sign a ballot, sign a petition for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The time is getting short. I believe that they have to file those respective signatures by July sometime in order to make the ballot. And so we'll see what kind of impact that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. can have on this election, if any. But we do know that there are some people out there that have made it very clear that they feel lost in this election in one party or another, and kind of want that other option. But will it make a big enough dent? Hard to say. Our country tends to fall in one bucket or another at the end of the day. And we'll see what happens. But that is the news of the day, Sarah, that we have collected over the weekend and today, and turned out to be a rather full show.
It did turn out to be a full show. A quick reminder that today is April 15th, which means it's tax day. So make sure you're in compliance there. And a final reminder that tomorrow at 11 a.m. is our member briefing on the Corporate Transparency Act and our legal action against the CTA. Brian will be leading that. It's at 11 a.m. You can register on our website. We do hope you have a wonderful week, and we will be back here Thursday at 3 p.m.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.